Okay, welcome back. This is the video 5 of the Flow Certified Professional online training course. We're going to be looking at tile 3 today, the flow friction analysis. And we have with us today, who's going to walk us through that, Bob Geist. Welcome back. And I'm going to let Bob introduce himself on this slide.
Thank you, Andrew. Um, I'm Bob Geist. I am a Flow certified coach, and I look forward to sharing my experience around the friction analysis. So if we take a look at the takeaways for this tile, it's based on the flow formula where you have vision with the right people and the 4D model will produce the flow that is required for success. And I'll get into the detail, but the idea is if you don't have vision, you're going to end up with anarchy. If you don't have the right people, you'll have anxiety. If you don't have definitions or the wrong definitions, there'll be confusion. And without distilled agreement, you'll see politics at play. And if you're not able to deliver, of course, you'll end up with chaos. And then if the results, the drive doesn't match the expectations of customer or stakeholder, you'll have division in your result. So with that as an overview, I want to share how I use the friction analysis. And there's two ways. One is up front. If you use it proactively at the beginning of the project, you can avoid friction. But to understand it, you need some experience. And so I want to take you through some problem solving, whereas the other application of using the tool is if you have issues, you can use the friction analysis to solve those problems. And friction often surfaces as disagreement. And there's two common scenarios that I want to share with you. One is if team members are arguing. It's one of two reasons. Either they haven't distilled their understanding of the definitions, and this will appear as politics. They're holding their position, protecting their department or their silo. And so they need to listen to each other and resolve their issues around the definitions. The other reason they might be arguing is the definitions aren't clear. And this leads to confusion. And so in either scenario, you need to help them identify the source of their friction and then have it resolved. And once they're able to distill agreement around clear definitions, the arguing stops and flow is reestablished. So that's one scenario where disagreement is because of friction. Another case is with the stakeholders. Stakeholders might be disappointed in the results, the drive portion of the model, and where your results don't match their expectations and you have that division, and division is literally two visions. And so you ask why. And the vision might not have been cascaded through all levels of the organization. And it's not uncommon that leadership has not distilled agreement amongst themselves. Thus, they have not communicated as a single voice to the project team and the organization. You think about if one team is not aligned because of a lack of a cascaded vision, then you can expect most teams will be misaligned, resulting in anarchy. Everyone's doing what they think is right, but it's in different directions. If this is your case, then the team's vision can be used to influence up in the organization to achieve vertical alignment. So that's one scenario. If stakeholders are unhappiest because they haven't cascaded their vision. The other case where stakeholders might be disappointed in the results is because of slow delivery, which is leads to chaos. And so this is where you use the 4D model in reverse to help problem solve. And the first is ask, do you have the right method? Do you need to move faster, have iterative approach with fewer communication channels? And thus maybe you need to apply more agile techniques versus what you're currently using. Or maybe you're using Agile, but you need to increase your velocity and do some problem solving. So retrospectives is a good way to improve throughput. If the method is adequate and then you work your way back, now you're into politics or confusion, which we already talked about. So if that's your source of friction, then like we discussed before, you resolve that. If you work further back in the 4D model, you ask, do you have the right people? And maybe when the project started, you thought you had the right folks, but you're not as T-shaped as you expected, or maybe some of the definitions are not what you expected. And so you don't have the right people and you have that anxiety, and thus you need to get the right resources on the team. So that's a way of working backwards to help identify why you're not delivering to the stakeholders' expectations. And the key is, once you find the source of the friction, you can fix it and then reestablish flow. Another way to identify friction is through the radar health checks, where you're analyzing the performance over time. And that's a good source of information to see if friction occurs, and if so, where is it, so that you can resolve it. So I hope that these examples of how you identify friction helps you prevent them at the start of a project. And if we go to the next tile, setting up for success, the idea is that you want to avoid anarchy by making sure you have a well-defined cascaded vision from leadership. These first two really fall in leadership's responsibility. Make sure you have the right people on the team to be able to execute. And then the team takes over on the definitions, making sure that they have clear definitions, the stories, the acceptance criteria, the work to be done. And then the team distills that with the product owner to make sure that they truly understand what's expected before they start executing. And then, as I talked about delivery, if you're always trying to find ways to improve your velocity, to get things faster and take waste out of your process. So focusing on delivery. And then that drive, that check. Are you still aligned with the customer expectation? Are you aligned with stakeholders? And so using the flow friction analysis as you work through a project up front helps you. And as I talked about, the day-to-day interactions, the applications amongst the different players, you're always looking for ways to get better, and identifying source of friction is a key way. Talk about refocus on vision. It's always important that you take a look at what you're doing. Does it match what the vision is? There's some nice to do things along the way, but if it's not aligned with your vision, don't spend time on it. And to summarize, for me, this friction analysis is a great tool to help coach and mentor teams and help them towards the path of success. But with that, Andrew, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, no, that was really good. I appreciate that. Thanks, Bob. There's a lot packed into all of this. And it's interesting because Bob and I actually worked together on a project last year. And so I got to see how you use the friction analysis. And for me, and that's why I had the day-to-day interactions here, because I watched you use it with individuals as necessary, because sometimes you would identify, for example, somebody they didn't get it. And you're just going, oh, either definition or distillation issue there. And you would chat with them about it. But what was really interesting is when we would survey the team to see where they were at. And you did some really cool things in the retrospectives. Can you share just a little bit more about how you did that in the retrospectives, how you used that to create the conversation?
All right. So we were at a point where the mission had changed. So we would call it phase 2. And the vision was still adequate, but the mission was now handing off the tool to other people.
Yeah.
And it wasn't received. And so we did the friction analysis on why were we struggling. And the first two, as I mentioned, the vision um, leadership had not really communicated what they were expecting. And even our stakeholders in the reviews, they wouldn't always have a common voice. So there was some work there, and so we were trying to influence our vision onto them to get them aligned with what we needed for support. And then with the right people, that also we identified as friction, because the team now wasn't the owner of the tool. It was different resources required to take the long-term ownership. Then when it came to definition, there were things that the team could do to help. And so that's what they focused on, whether it was drafting a communication for leadership or communicating with people selected to take the handoff. They worked on definition, distillation, and then our velocity within the Scrum activity. And then our stakeholder review became a little more productive. And we actually gave them some follow-up tasks and tracked it on our Kanban board. So the team took ownership, but the tool was very valuable because they could relate to it. And then we put our action plans next to the different types of friction. But initially, we had friction in all areas that we could work on.
Yeah, and that's why this is so valuable. And what was interesting is you used it multiple times over the 8 to 12 month time span. You use this often in the retrospectives. And that's actually a form of helping the team to continuously improve. And
Yeah.
so I thought that was just absolutely fantastic. And the team responded really well to it. It was really fun to watch the team and how they would respond to this particular technique and method, because we used it so many different ways. And we even printed it out and put it up on the wall with the, there's some slides called Flow in a Nutshell. And we had those up on the wall so that the minute we would hear something, we would go, it would set off the little alarm bell, and we'd walk over and create a conversation using the Flow in a Nutshell papers that we printed out on 11 by 17. So that was also extremely useful for making sure that we kept that conversation flow going. So I thought that was really good. And one more thing that was interesting is that the vision hadn't really changed throughout the whole thing. But when we went from phase 1 to phase 2, it's right there that we started with all areas with friction. And the minute we did that shift, it created that friction again. And it wasn't so much that it was friction inside the room, it was friction outside the room in
Correct.
the rest of the organization. And so that was a key thing that you had picked up on that I just thought was fantastic, because it really helped the stakeholders up the food chain really understand what we were up against, and that they hadn't adequately planned for getting this tool rolled out to the organization. So yeah, that was really good.
And like I said, a key learning is that we learned about the friction in the model as we experienced the project. But
Yep.
the next project, that organization should be able to use it up front to avoid the friction and set themselves up for success.
Yep, exactly. Okay. Thank you very much. This was excellent. I'm going to try to figure out how to get Zoom back up so I can stop the share. It's not giving me. There it is. Here we go. Now I can stop the recording. Thanks, Bob. This was really good. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Andrew.